This session is preparing for the BMAT, and the aim of this session is to provide an overview of the BMAT, give example questions from all three sections with explanations of how to answer them, and offer tips and strategies on how to prepare for BMAT and achieve your best results. We're joined by Dr. Harrison, and I'm going to pass it on to you to have your presentation.
Thank you very much. So, as I said, I'll talk a little bit about why BMAT is used and why you have to sit it. I'll then talk about what is in BMAT, what the structure is, what the sections are, and most of this session will actually be taken up with going through examples taken from previous BMAT papers, and I'll actually talk through how to actually answer them. I'll end the session with a few tips about how to prepare for BMAT and some tips about what to do actually on the day of sitting BMAT, and hopefully we'll have time for a few questions afterwards. So everybody always asks, well, why do I have to take BMAT? You know, why are you making me sort of do this? You've got my A-levels, you've got my application and so on. So for many medical schools, they actually have applications from a wide range of people who have all sorts of different qualifications. You know, even if we're looking at UK students, some of them will be from Scotland, they'll have hires, be from England, Wales, but also from other countries as well, and different sorts of qualifications. So the BMAT actually gives them one piece of information which is common to all of their applicants. So they can use that to actually sort of compare different applicants. And it also helps them to actually select between candidates who have very similar qualifications. You're all, you know, if you're applying to become a doctor or a dentist, then you have high scores in your GCSEs, you'll be predicted good A-level grades. So the universities have to be able to select between candidates who on paper look very similar. So BMAT gives them another piece of information in order to make that comparison. It also helps the university and the medical school to identify if you're the right student for the course. And what I mean by that is BMAT and the style of questions that you have to answer is actually a good example of what you'll be doing actually on the course. It shows you the ways that you need to think, how you can apply your knowledge, how you'll be communicating with different people. So all of these sort of skills are very similar to what you'll be doing on the course. So it helps the university and the medical school actually know if you're the right student for the course. It also helps you to decide, are you right for the course, or is the course right for you? If the way that BMAT is structured, the way it asks you to solve problems and apply your knowledge, if that appeals to you, then that's probably a good indicator that you'll actually enjoy the course itself. But it's very important to remember that BMAT is just one part of the application process. It's one piece of information amongst many that the medical schools are actually using to decide who they're going to make offers to. So it's not the be-all and end-all of your application. It's just, remember, it is just one piece of information, but it is also a chance for you to show just what you're capable of, how you think, what your abilities are, and how well you might actually do on the course. So we'll move quickly on to actually talking about how to prepare for the test. And one of the first things that you need to do in order to prepare for it is actually to know what is in BMAT. What does it cover? How is it structured? So BMAT has 3 sections. It's all done at the moment as a pen and paper test. So you're actually sort of writing it. It's not sat at a computer. You're actually answering questions. You have 3 different papers. They are given to you one at a time. So you have your section 1, you sit that for an hour, that paper is then taken away from you. You then have the section 2 paper, you have 30 minutes for that. And then you have section 3 paper and you have 30 minutes for that. So you can't sort of whiz through section 1 in 40 minutes in order to have an extra 20 minutes on section 2. So with the sections, section 1 is aptitude and skills. So this is 32 multiple choice questions. Each question carries 1 mark. So there's no sort of graded sort of things. You either get the correct answer or you don't. There's no negative marking. So even if you guess and you get the wrong answer, you're not going to lose marks. You only gain marks for correct answers. And in section 1, the questions are around the skills of problem solving, understanding arguments, analyzing data, and making inferences and judgments from things. Section 2 is scientific knowledge and applications. Section 2 is 30 minutes. Again, it's multiple choice questions. We're looking at 27 multiple choice questions. And again, it's 1 mark per question with no negative scoring. And these questions are around applying your knowledge of biology, chemistry, physics, and mathematics. And that knowledge level is at a GCSE level. So you don't need to be doing A-level physics, for instance, in order to be able to answer those questions. But we'll get on to actually what the content is and what you need to know in a little bit. Section 3 is a writing task. So you have 30 minutes to write a very short essay that you choose from one of 3 questions. And when I say it's a short essay, you have 1 side of A4 paper to actually answer the question. So it is very short and it is very structured. And again, we'll be looking at an example of that later on. So section 1, as I said, the questions are around sort of problem solving and understanding arguments. So the skills that it's actually sort of testing are your ability to pick out the relevant information, to actually recognize when something is similar to another case or another example, and actually to apply often mathematical or numerical procedures in order to organize and sort through things and process things to come to an answer. Understanding argument is often called critical thinking. And in those questions, you will have a short paragraph of text, usually sort of putting forward some reasoning or arguing for a particular point of view. And you will be asked to either identify what conclusion the passage is drawing, or you might even be asked to identify where the author is actually making a mistake in their logic, a flaw in their argument, and you have to identify what that is. As I said, section 2 is all about biology, chemistry, physics, and mathematics. And section 2 is where you really need to have some particular knowledge. Section 1 doesn't rely on any external knowledge. Section 2 does. Section 3, the essay section, although the topics for the essay questions will be very much around philosophical, often moral or ethical issues, or considering sort of science or medicine, they again don't rely on any specific knowledge. What's being tested is actually your ability to argue for a particular position, to justify your thoughts and your conclusions. So we'll go on to look at some specific examples now. So this example is taken from BMAT paper, I think in 2014, if I remember correctly. So this is an example of an understanding argument question. So as I said, you have 1 hour and 32 questions in section 1. So that's roughly 2 minutes in order to read through the question, think through it, identify what you have to do, and then select the correct answer from the choices. And those options will often be from anything from 4 to 8 options. I think at the moment, there's a tendency for section 1 to have 5 options. So in this case, it's actually an argument talking about how people learn music and listen to music and understand it. And it's also talking about brain waves and the way the brains work. Now, you don't need to know anything about music. You don't need to know anything about brains or how they process and analyze things in order to answer this question. All of the information for section 1 questions is there in the text. You don't need to know anything more than what's actually sort of written there. And as you can see, this question is actually asking you to identify a flaw in the above argument. So you need to go back, read through it, work out what the argument is, and then identify a flaw in it. And you can see there are 4 options there. So it's actually sort of arguing that musicians seem to be able to synchronize to the tempo of music, whereas non-musicians, those who aren't musically trained, have a particular inability to synchronize and find particular difficulty in synchronizing to slow music. They can't keep track of that tempo. And so it argues that musicians have an innate tendency for the brain, an innate ability for the brain to synchronize to the tempo of any speed of music, which non-musicians lack. So looking at the options, which of those actually identifies a flaw in the above argument? Now, I don't know, I can't see my screen at the moment, so I don't know if you're coming up with answers, but the correct answer for this question is actually that it is B. The flaw that is identified in the argument is that it presumes that musical training is irrelevant. It's only natural ability to actually allows you to synchronize to music, whereas B is actually proposing that it may be that actual musical training helps to develop the ability and tendency for the brain to synchronize to music. So I'll move on to a problem-solving question now. So here we're told that we have a magazine which has a number of pages which are always in multiples of 32. So the magazine can have 32, 64, 96 pages. The front cover is always counted as page 1. And you're asked to identify which of the 5 options actually lists possible page numbers for the center spread of the magazine. So when you open it up in the middle, what would be the page numbers that you're facing? Now, obviously, you could just count through all of the pages and try to come to it by that. But you don't have much time. You have, less than 2 minutes to actually answer the questions. So we need to do this really quickly. So first of all, we know that they are multiples of 32 with the sort of pages, and that the front cover is always page 1. So if you think about when you open it up in the middle, then if the front cover is page 1, then on the left-hand side, you're going to have page 2, and then on the right-hand side, you're going to have page 3. When you get to the middle, it will still be that on the left-hand side, you have an even number page, and on the right-hand side, you have an odd number page. So if we look at the options, we can actually remove those that have an odd number as the first option. So we've already removed A and D from our options. Now, we're told that the pages are always multiples of 32, which means that halfway through on the center spread, that's going to be half of 32. So that's going to be 16. So it's always going to be multiples of 16. Looking at the options is with B, is 30 a multiple of 16? We know it's not. C, 50, that again is not a multiple of 16, but E is actually a multiple of 16. So we can correctly identify that option E is the correct option, that the center spread could only be numbered 96 and 97 out of those available options. I will point out here that even if you didn't get as far as narrowing it down to E itself, by eliminating some of the options, you can narrow down the towards the correct answer. And if you're running out of time, you can always have a lucky guess. So it's worth taking some time to actually eliminate options in order to increase your chances of picking the correct answer. Because to be honest, with BMAT, with multiple choice questions, a lucky answer gets you as many points as a worked out answer. So please do bear that in mind. Previous years, BMAT did also have a third type of question in section 1, which was called data analysis and inference. And these showed you a larger amount of data, often a page or two of data, and asked a few questions about those. So if you're actually looking at past papers, you may see some of those. They're still useful in that they are very similar to the understanding argument and problem solving questions, but I won't take time to do this. But just as a quick example, you can see this question is actually asking you to identify a conclusion that can be drawn from a passage of text. So very similar to understanding argument, whereas this question is actually asking you to do some calculations and to analyze some data. So again, very similar to problem solving questions. But I'll now move on to section 2. So as I said, section 2 covers biology, chemistry, physics, and mathematics. And it's very much about your ability to apply the knowledge that you have. So as I've already said, the knowledge that's being assumed that you have for section 2 is at roughly a GCSE level. Talk a little bit more about exactly what the sort of content is, but let's have a look at one of the questions. So here we have a biology question. It's asking you about sort of kidneys and the function of the kidney. And the question actually asks you to identify some of the vessels which are actually numbered in the diagram on the right hand side. So you can see that the kidney is there on the far right, and we have other vessels which are asked to identify. Now we have 6 options here for the sort of correct answer. If we start to think about the kidney and what the function of the kidney is, and we can see that the 2 columns talk about the lowest concentration of urea and the highest concentration of urea. Now, one of the functions of the kidney is actually to extract urea from the blood and sort of filter it out. So by that reasoning, we can know that the highest concentration of urea is actually going to be coming out of the kidney. So it's actually going to be in the vessel which is numbered 5 on the diagram. So that means that we can actually eliminate quite quickly options A and B, because they refer to 2 as being the area with the highest concentration of urea. So now we have 4 options. All of them in the second column are referring to number 5 in the diagram. 2 of them refer to it as the urethra, and 2 of them refer to it as the ureter. Now, if we know about the kidney, we'll know that it's the ureter that actually comes from the kidney, whereas the urethra is what comes from out of the bladder. So we can actually quickly remove 2 more options. So we're now down to 2 out of 6 possible options. Both of them refer to 5 as the ureter. So if we start to look at the other column, so one of them, D, actually refers to 3 and talks of that as the renal vein. And we can see that 3 is connected to 1, which is a vessel which has quite a thin wall and quite a wide channel through it. Whereas E refers to 4 as the renal vein. We can see that 4 connects up to vessel 2. Vessel 2 has quite thick walls and quite a narrow channel. So hopefully you'll remember that arteries tend to have thick walls and narrow channels, whereas it's veins that have the thinner walls and the wider channels. So we can correctly identify that 3 is probably a renal vein because 1 is probably a vein. So therefore the correct answer is D. So hopefully that's shown you how, with a little bit of knowledge about what the kidney is and what its function is, and about veins and arteries, we can quickly remove options and identify the correct answer, which in this case was D. Just having a look at a chemistry question. So you can see here a graph showing the production of carbon dioxide as against time from an experiment. So X is the actual experiment that's done. In the question itself, it actually gives you, quite helpfully, the equation for the experiment, for the reaction. And it tells you that line X shows the volume of carbon dioxide that was formed when hydrochloric acid was reacted with the calcium carbonate chips. You're then asked to identify the line that best represents the volume of carbon dioxide formed when the reaction is repeated, but this time with more concentrated hydrochloric acid. So hopefully you'll remember from your chemistry lessons that if you have a higher concentration of acid, it's going to speed up the reaction, but it won't actually produce more of the carbon dioxide. So what we're looking for is the line which shows an increase, a more rapid reaction, but then levels out to the same volume as was produced with the original experiment. So if we go back to the diagram, we can see that line B is actually producing the carbon dioxide faster than in X, but then over time it levels out and is producing the same volume. So the correct answer here was actually B. Now I'll take you through a physics question. So you can see we have a question around the density of a material. And if we actually look at the answers, it actually tells you what is density. Density is mass over volume. So grams over cubic centimeters. So let's start with thinking about the actual sort of mass of these sort of objects. So we've shown the scales in the diagram. When they're resting without anything on them, they show 20 grams. With the water, it shows 170 grams. And we can see with one of the objects, it shows 470. So we can quickly work out that 470 minus the 170 grams of water actually gives us 300 grams. So we know that the mass of one of these objects is actually going to be 300 grams. So looking at the options there, we can actually eliminate all of them apart from D and E just with knowing that. So even if you couldn't go any further, you've already got a 50-50 chance of selecting the correct answer. So let's start thinking about the actual volume of the objects. So we can see that in the second sort of column, we have 250 cubic centimeters of water, whereas on the final one, it shows 350 cubic centimeters in the measuring cylinder. So we know that with the object in there, that's a volume of 100 cubic centimeters. However, the answer is not E in this case, because if you notice in the diagram, it actually has two of the objects. So two of the objects have a volume of 100 cubic centimeters. So one of the objects will have a volume of 50 cubic centimeters. So the correct answer here is actually D. Just to have a quick look at a maths question. So at first glance, you might be thinking, well, isn't this more physics? It's talking about mass, it's talking about kilograms and so on. But the actual question, if you look closely at it, is actually asking you about how to calculate the mean, the average. It's the mean mass that you're actually sort of looking at. So I'll give you a few seconds to sort of think about this question and how you might approach it, but just bear in mind that it's actually asking you all about how you calculate the mean of something rather than be worrying about sort of masses and kilograms and so on. And with this question, the correct answer is actually B, it's 12. All of the information, all of the knowledge that you need to know in order to be able to accurately and successfully answer the questions in section 2 is all based on GCSE level of knowledge. However, the makers of BMAT actually know that different schools follow different curriculums, different syllabuses, and may have covered different sort of topics. So they actually provide both a list of all of the facts and information that you need to know, and they also have what they call an assumed knowledge guide, which is available for free on their website. And you can see the link there. I'll also sort of show this later on. That is a wonderful resource. It takes you through every single piece of knowledge and information that you need to know in order to be able to successfully answer the questions in section 2. None of it is pitched at an A-level standard. It's all at a GCSE standard. However, what's different is actually asking you to apply the knowledge rather than just recall knowledge and just answer questions. So it's actually asking you to make use of that knowledge in a practical way. Now go on to section 3, the writing task. And for many people, this is a concerning part of the BMAT because you've studied science, you're not really familiar with essay writing and what's involved in that. So often people are quite worried about it. So first thing that I want to reassure you is it is a short task. It's a very short essay. You have only a single side of A4 to write on. And what's being marked is the quality of the content of your answer and the quality of the English being used. Now, by quality of the English being used, just mean, is it clear? Is it comprehensible? Can somebody understand what you are saying? So then the markers are not going to be picking out every single slight spelling error or a missing apostrophe or a misplaced comma. It's marked very holistically. Can the examiner actually understand what you are saying? Is your quality of English sufficient in order to allow you to communicate your ideas? And when it comes to the quality of content, what they're looking for is, can you express an idea? Can you construct a counter argument? Can you give the reasons why you think the things that you do and why you come to the conclusions that you do? And the key to section 3 is to always justify what you are saying. Don't just say, I think that there is money to be made from curing diseases. Say, I think there is money to be made from curing diseases because of this reason and this reason. Now, as you can see from the question there, and all of the questions in section 3 follow the same format of you have often a statement or a quotation, and it's followed by essentially 3 questions. So first of all, it will ask you, what do you think is meant by this statement? Or essentially, what does this statement mean? So you start off your response, your essay, by actually saying what you think this means. So here you might be thinking, well, actually, I think that this is talking about how pharmaceutical companies can actually make a lot of profits from providing things which relieve the symptoms of a disease rather than eliminating the disease completely. So think about how much money a company might make from producing painkillers and medication to ease the symptoms of a cold, as opposed to actually eliminating sort of cold and flu from us. The second part will often ask you to construct a counter argument. So say a a counter point of view, an alternative point of view to that that's being expressed in the statement. So here you might say, well, actually, you know, if it was known that pharmaceutical companies weren't actually finding cures for diseases, they were just investing in finding things to relieve the symptoms, then people would stop buying their products, and so they would no longer make money. So that's a counter argument to the statement that there is money to be made from not curing disease. The final part of the task will often be asking you to what extent you agree or disagree with the statement. So here you'll be summing things up and coming to your own conclusion. And it's important to remember that there are no right answers in section 3. The marking scheme does not say that you must come to this conclusion or that you must present these particular arguments. It's all concerned with the quality of your arguments. And if you actually go onto the BMAT website, you'll actually be able to see the marking criteria that are used for all of the essays. So really what it's actually asking you to do is to present a structured argument. And the key things to do to that are to read through the question so you actually know what it's asking and what you have to do, and then to actually plan out your argument. Now, it doesn't need to be a direct sort of, no, you're wrong in response to the statement, but it does need to be a reasoned argument. You need to give reasons and justifications that lead to the conclusion that you're drawing. So really, if you follow this, then you've actually already got a plan for your section 3, even before you see the questions themselves. So you want to start off with an introduction, which actually explains what you think the statement means. And again, there are no right or wrong answers with this. If you explain what you think the statement means and why you think that it means that, then you are doing what's being asked of you. And the markers expect that. That's what they're looking for, even if they disagree with your interpretation. If you've laid it out clearly and plainly, then you're going to get the marks for it. So you then may move on to actually giving the reasons for the statement itself and why you agree with it in this case. Then you'll go on to presenting the counter arguments. So you'll come up with 1 or 2 reasons against the statement. You then may lead into what you think is your strongest reason. And that will lead you into your conclusion, where you'll be saying, actually, I agree with this statement because of this reason. And although I'm aware of some of the counter arguments, I still feel that the statement is actually true because of this. When you're constructing your section 3 essay, it is really important to have a clear idea about where you're going and what you're going to include in it. You have a limited amount of space. You have one side of A4 to write on. If you write on the other side, the examiners will not mark that. So all they're looking for is what's on that first page, the front side of the answer paper. However, you can actually use the question paper itself to write on. So you can actually draw up a plan in the BMAT, in the test itself. You can write out your plan to make sure that you don't forget anything, that you've actually sort of covered everything, and nobody is going to look at that question paper. And this is in fact true for all of the sections. You can write on the question paper, you can do calculations, you can draw diagrams, you can plan things out, and there is deliberately plenty of space on the question papers. So hopefully this has all sort of helped you to see that BMAT, despite its reputation of being a difficult and demanding sort of test, is actually quite straightforward. There's also a lot of help available. If you go to the Cambridge Assessment Admissions Testing website, there's a whole section there around preparing for BMAT, and that has the BMAT test specification, which actually outlines all of the sections, just as I've done today, and actually states what assumed scientific and mathematical knowledge lies behind the questions. You also will find on the website lots and lots of practice papers, answers, solutions, examples of essays, and all of the past papers from the past over 10 years now of sort of BMAT, and those are all there available for free for you to download. There are also many sort of tips, videos, and documents which will allow you to and support you in preparing for BMAT itself. So my main piece of advice would actually be to go to that website, have a look at the test specification, have a look at the specimen and past papers so that you have a thorough understanding of the test itself, how it's formatted, what the content is, what will be asked for you. I will also say that for section 2, you really need to revise your science. So use the section 2 knowledge guide. You can use that to identify any gaps that you didn't cover in your GCSEs. Go back to your old GCSE notes. Hopefully you won't have thrown them away after you sat your GCSEs. So use those, use the knowledge guide that's there. Make sure that you know about all of the topics that can come up. And the specification does list everything that will come up. So you can be certain that anything that's not listed in there, it's not going to sort of come up. I'd also say that good preparation for the test is actually to keep up on scientific and medical topics that are in the news, have a look at news sites, but also scientific blogs and various things. And just be aware of the sort of discussions that may be going on in science and medicine. Being aware of how people will actually present information in order to lead you to certain conclusions, and being able to critically engage with that, follow their reasoning, identifying the flaws and so on, will help you with both section 3 and also with section 1 and many of the questions. When it gets closer to the BMAT, I would suggest that you actually have a look at some of the past papers and have a go at working through some of the questions and seeing how you cope with them. Are you getting them right? Are you finding the right sort of solutions to things? Then have a look at your work and compare it with some of the sort of worked answers that are there available on the website. Final piece of preparation that I would advise for BMAT is to actually sit one of the past papers under test conditions. So that's making yourself do it under timed conditions, with no books to help you, with no calculator. You're not allowed calculator in BMAT. So have a go at doing that under proper test conditions. And that will give you a good idea, not only of the difficulty of the tests, but also how quickly you can do things and how much time you need to give yourself for each of the different sections. But I would say don't do too many practice papers, and don't start doing this sort of too early. You don't want to burn yourself out, but just a few weeks before you actually sit the test, have a go at doing 1 or 2 sort of practice papers. And on the test day itself, just take some time to relax and plan things out. Think about how much time you have to each question. So for section 1, you're going to have just under 2 minutes for each question on average. So think about that. If you are finding that it's difficult and you're getting stuck on a question, you can always skip it, go on to another question, and then come back to it later. So sometimes you might think, actually, I'm really quick on understanding argument questions, so I'm just going to go through and do all of those, and then I'll know exactly how much time I've got to go back and do the problem-solving questions. If you are unsure of an answer, then if you can, eliminate some of the options that are clearly wrong, and if the worst comes to the worst, take a guess. If you're making an informed guess, that's often, more helpful than spending 5-10 minutes on one question. So be willing to take a guess. If you get it wrong, you just don't get a mark for it. So you don't lose anything by having a guess. You may get lucky, or your instincts and your hunches might actually be correct. So always be willing to take a guess if you haven't come to a correct answer. Use the question paper for your workings out. As I've said, there's plenty of space on the question papers themselves, and those are not marked. They're not looked at by the examiners. All that's looked at is your answer sheet. So you can actually draw things, underline things, do calculations on the question paper. Just make sure that you do actually put your final answer onto the answer sheets. And for any question in BMAT, if it's unfamiliar to you, take a step back, actually think about what knowledge you do have which can be applied to this context, even if you don't know anything about it. Even if you don't know anything about music or the way that brains process information, you still know certain things and you have the knowledge which you can actually use to successfully solve the problem. So to sum things up, don't panic. BMAT has a reputation for being scary and difficult. It's honestly not. And the first part of the battle is actually knowing what BMAT looks like, what it contains, and how to approach things. And having listened to me, then hopefully you now know exactly what BMAT looks like and what it's actually going to ask you. If you forget this, you can go onto the Cambridge Assessment website and look at more examples and refresh your memory about it. I would also say that enjoy your subject, enjoy science, enjoy thinking and reasoning about things. If you don't enjoy it, you're not going to enjoy being a doctor or being a dentist. So, find the joy, find your enthusiasm in the subject and apply that. And in that way, BMAT itself is actually an opportunity for you to show what you can do and how engaged you are in science and thinking and communicating. Final tip is to get some practice in. Be familiar with the format of the test, how much time it takes you to go through the different sections, have some practice at the different questions, but don't do too much practice. Don't burn yourself out. Be familiar with it, be confident, but don't overdo it. So I'm quite happy to take any additional questions if you want to ask them. But hopefully that is a helpful, quick tour of sort of BMAT and how to approach the questions. And if you forget everything that I've said, please do remember that the website from Admissions Testing Service is there. You can go to that. All of the resources are there. They're completely free, and everything is there that will help you to successfully prepare and sit the BMAT test.
Thank you very much. There are a few questions that came in. You can have a look at the chat section, or I can read them out for you, whichever you prefer.
So I see, so somebody's asking, is the BMAT exam the same for that cohort? So for the, in the last few years, there have been sort of separate sessions of BMAT. There's been a September session and a November session. So those would be different papers. But they are all of the same quality. They were all prepared by the same examiners, written by the same examiners. So it is different papers, but they are of the same quality and the same format and structure. There has been a lot of talk. Somebody's asking, they've heard that BMAT will be online. How will Section 3 work for this? There has been a lot of, sort of talk about moving BMAT to online. If that does happen with section 3, it will just be, again, it's typing things out. And in the past, there have been some people who have needed sort of laptops or other ways to sort of type out rather than handwrite the essays. So it will involve sort of typing rather than handwriting, but other than that, it will be no different. There is a fee to take the sort of BMAT. If you actually go onto the admissions testing website, you'll be able to see what the fee is. They do also offer bursaries if you are unable to afford the sort of fee. Again, you can find out more information about that on the website. Somebody's asking if all of the sections are done together. So they're not, they are done sort of separately. So you have section 1, then section 2, then section 3. So you don't get to see all of the papers at once. It's one at a time. They do not give you breaks in between them. So you might have a few seconds while they take the papers away and bring out the next paper, but there's no actual sort of breaks between the sort of papers. Is the BMAT as time pressured as the UCAT? I would say there are similar pressures, particularly for section 2. You know, you're looking at 27 questions in half an hour. So it is 1 minute per question, and there is a relatively large amount for you to read and sort of think through. So there is definite time pressure, but just as with UCAT, it is designed so that it is doable in that amount of time. Any books or question banks other than the BMAT website? There are a number of sort of books out there. None of them are necessarily sort of produced by Cambridge Assessment. So I would say that it's worth looking at books around sort of critical thinking or and problem solving and so on. But really, all of the information that you need, all of the guidance and support is available for free on the BMAT website. So, yes, negative scoring, that just means that you don't lose marks if you get a question wrong. How long would you recommend to revise for the BMAT? I would say probably, it does vary from person to person, but on average, start revising, start preparing maybe about 2 months before you're going to sit the BMAT. I'd say the first few weeks, just have a look at the format of it, have a read through some of the actual sort of answers that are given there. Then after a few weeks, have a go at some of the questions yourself. Maybe sort of 2 weeks before you sit the BMAT, make yourself sit 1 or 2 papers under test conditions. But I really would say don't do too much. You don't want to burn out. You want to be confident that you know what to expect, but don't worry about it and don't get anxious about it. I'm very aware of the sort of time, so I'm going to sort of bring things to an end there.
Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hope everyone else enjoyed it and found this very useful.
Thank you.